So today we're honored to host these two experts on this topic. Today we have Ronald Mihalik, President of Breakaway Test Prep, and Jody Fox, Director of College Counseling at Charlotte Christian School. On behalf of the Navigate 2020 event sponsor, GoToCollege Fairs, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our panelists and thank you so much again for taking the time to present on this important topic. Let's begin.
Very good. All right, so welcome everybody. We're glad to have you here. My name is Jody Fox, and of course you can see in one of those screens or squares on your screen, Ron Mihalik, my colleague. We are in different cities. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Ron is in Minneapolis, but thanks to the good old internet, we can all be here with you today. Ron, you want to go ahead and start sharing the presentation?
Will do.
All right, well, Ron gets that queued up. I did see some questions in the Q&A asking who is this presentation appropriate for? So let me just answer that real quickly. Anyone who's coming up on taking an SAT or an ACT would benefit from this. So that's primarily going to be students currently in grades 10 or 11. Typically these tests are taken in the junior year and also fall of senior year. So those two grades would be most appropriate, but anyone who just wants to hear about this is welcome to listen in. So Scott, I think we were gonna throw up a poll. It will help us to know a little bit about you so that we can tailor our comments to what will be most relevant for you. So if you wouldn't mind answering that poll for us real quickly, that will just tell us a little bit so that we can give you comments that make sense. And Ron, while they're answering the poll, did you want to say a few words as introduction?
Sure, thanks Jody. Hi, my name's Ron Mihalik, and good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are from Edina, Minnesota, outside of Minneapolis. I'm the founder of Breakaway Test Prep, which is a leading provider of ACT and SAT prep here in the Twin Cities area of Minnesota. We also help students prepare for the SAT subject tests and AP exams, and certainly grateful to be here. I started Breakaway in the summer of 2011, and I'm certainly grateful to say that today we have about 45 instructors, 5 offices, and work with about 1,500 students each year from Minnesota, Western Wisconsin, Northern Iowa, and anywhere in the world online. We have a terrific set of partnerships with some leading independent schools here in Minnesota. And we also are the only test prep organization in the Midwest to have a program specifically designed for students with learning disabilities and attention disorders. And you can find us online at breakawaytestprep.com. Back to you, Jody.
Very good. All right, thanks. All right, Scott, do we have results on the poll yet? Or we can just move on if we don't?
So yes, so we're getting great results on the polling. So it looks like there are over 1,000 responses on the polling. So so it looks like a good variety here. Are you able to see the polling results here?
Can't see the results.
Okay, all right, then I'll see here to make sure that we can.
So
right.
While he's working on that, just a reminder to everyone too that our presentation is built in with time for Q&A at the end. So you're welcome to put questions in the Q&A as we go, and we'll hit that at the end if it's not something that we answer as we go along.
All right, just a moment, give it a few more further
Sure.
responses
We
here.
can see on the screen right now what we're going to be talking about today. I think obviously the impact of COVID-19 is on everyone's mind, so we're just going to start with that. Let's just get in there because I think that's what people are thinking about right now. But then definitely want to take some time, since your opportunities to test may be limited, definitely want to take some time for Ron to share some essentials of how to do well on the SAT and the ACT. And then we'll finish up by just talking about how to develop your own personal testing plan, because that really depends on the student. Honestly, there's a lot of variables that go into when is the best time to test, which test is better for me, etc. So we'll talk a little bit about how you know what your personal testing plan ought to be.
So I will go ahead and share the results so that you can take a look there.
Okay, perfect. Mostly students. More students currently in 11th grade, but glad to have other grades along with us. And the Northeast is winning for the region most attended. But I see the South. I see you, my Southern folks. That's great. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate that. All right. So as you can see, here's a little information about where things stand with SAT and ACT right now. So ACT canceled its April test, but they still intend to run their June and their July testing. And they've announced makeup dates for the 1 week after their originally scheduled dates. That is really just in case there's a test center that can't or doesn't feel safe administering on the original date. That buys them an extra week in case they need it. College Board and the SAT had some closures in March, but then they canceled their May and their June tests. And they have announced that they will begin testing again in August, but they anticipate a pretty high number of students who will need to be taking an SAT then. So they added a September test date to try to help offset the number of students who need to test. They will be opening up registration for the August, September, and October tests during the week of May 26th. But that week, it will be only open to students who either have never taken an SAT before or students who were registered for the May or the June SAT. So students in those two groups get first dibs to register for the SAT. My advice would be don't wait. I would go ahead and get yourself registered. And then after that week of May 26th, it will open up to everybody. Meanwhile, both organizations say they are developing an online test should it be needed in the fall. So we'll see what happens with that. They haven't said anything more than we're working on it. So we don't really know much about it. So here are the dates that we have available to us as of now. And I'll remind you, since this is going to stay up on the website for a period of time, that we're recording this in early May, and this changes fairly often. So if you're watching this a month from now, it may be very different. But as of today, here's what we've got. These are the test dates coming available to us soon. So we'll see how many of these we can actually partake in, but our hope is that these tests will all actually go off as planned. So here's the million-dollar question, right? What if I don't have enough opportunities with the SAT or the ACT to earn my target score? I think that's what people are most nervous about. I will tell you, my email inbox has been flooded with colleges saying, we get it. Remember, they're experiencing the exact same thing on their campuses. They understand that education has changed, that testing has changed, that your opportunities are different. And so please don't worry if you're only able to test once where you might have wanted to test 3 times, for example, or even if you're not able to get a score, reach out to a college and talk with them about that. Certainly explain it. There's a spot on the Common App and many other applications where it just says, is there anything you want us to know that we didn't already ask you? That's where you say, my plan had been to test X, Y, and Z times, and I could only test on this time. And they get it, they understand. And so they really will be reviewing it with a holistic method, meaning they look at everything, not just the scores. They're not gonna put likely as much emphasis on it if you're not able to take the test as many times as you wanted. So here you'll see some information about a growing trend among colleges, and that is many of them have responded with a temporary test optional policy. This is part of their message of we get it and we understand. So these numbers, again, they continue to change. If you want to see the list of colleges that have announced that they're adopting this policy, you can go to fairtest.org, which is linked in the screen right there. But then also, you can be just checking the website of the individual colleges that you are interested in to read their policies, but this is a growing number. Now, this is not the majority of colleges nationwide that are going test optional, and I think it's important to remember that test optional does not equal test blind. So if you apply to a college that is temporarily test optional without a test score, that's fine, but know that that means they are going to put greater emphasis then on the other elements of your application. So your grades in your classes, how difficult were your classes, what have you been involved with outside of school, etc. Your letters of recommendation, your essay, they're all going to take on more weight if you don't submit test scores. So while there is flexibility here, keep in mind that they still need to have things to evaluate you on. They still need to be able to choose one applicant over another, for example. So they will be looking at the other elements. If you're not sure if you should apply to a college test optional, I would definitely recommend that you talk with your counselor and strategize together about what's in your best interest there. So this is a quote that I like to have up pretty much all the time. College is a match to be made, not a prize to be won. This is just a mindset that I hope you will all embrace. Sometimes I think people look at college admissions like it's a competition, and their main goal is, I need to get into the most highly selective college possible. And they're aiming for that with all other things left off to the side. But really, college is a match to be made. One of the things that I say to my students often is, I want you to be happy on an average Tuesday at your college. And if you're walking around saying, wow, this is a highly ranked college, I don't know that that's really going to be the thing that makes you happy, right? You may be proud of that, but are you going to be happy on an average Tuesday? What's going to make you happy and content? What's going to make a college one that is a match is finding your people, having a sense of community and having a sense of home. That's what matters. So when it comes to your grades, when it comes to your test scores, do your best, put forth your best effort, and then we'll send that off to a variety of colleges and see where that takes you. But all you need to do is do your best. I know that's kind of cliche, but really, all you need to do is do your best and trust that the rest will work itself out. The college that is a match for you will also match your grades, your test scores, etc. It all matches. It's all one big package, really. So with that said, I'm going to hush and I'm going to turn it over to Ron, because he's going to help you with that, how to do your best on the SAT or the ACT. All right, Ron, take it away.
Thank you, Jody. I do think that this slide is a good segue from Charlotte, North Carolina, on up to Minneapolis, Minnesota. It is a small world because it's actually Frank Sachs who gave Breakaway its first opportunity in a more formal environment, and he invited Breakaway in back in 2011 into the Blake School to do in school during the class day ACT and SAT prep. Been forever grateful for that opportunity, and I'm glad that Frank Sachs' words of wisdom continue to be shared to this day. So I wanted to take a few minutes. I noticed some of those questions that were coming in before the presentation even began about whether this would be appropriate, or were we going to have any comments that were aimed specifically toward current sophomores, toward current juniors, toward rising juniors, toward rising seniors. Happy to say that I think a lot of these comments, even if you're a current freshman, I think a lot of these comments that we're going to make will be relevant to you, if not now, but certainly in the very near future. What I wanted to do was just take a moment really to begin to address some questions about the two tests, especially for students who are just beginning to embark on their journeys to prepare for and to take the ACT and the SAT. What I wanted to do was kind of do a comparison and a contrast of these two tests. I'd like to start with their similarities, and I'm not going to regurgitate what's on the slide here, but both of the tests are offered 7 times during the year, typically the first or second weekend of a given month in which the tests will be offered. You know, they both tend to draw from buckets, if you will, of frequently tested concepts in grammar, in reading, in Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry and trigonometry. Both tests are about 3 hours in length. And both cause plenty of fear, trepidation, and anxiety among those who have to actually sit for the tests, or among those whose kids are sitting for the tests. So part of this is to help allay some of those concerns and give you a better perspective on what awaits you if you haven't begun testing. But there are also some very important differences as well. I think the first and foremost difference between the two tests are the time constraints. The ACT is a pretty time-constrained test in roughly about 3 hours. students are going to be asked to deal with about 215 problems. So that's an average of less than a minute per problem. Over on the SAT, in about 3 hours, students have to deal with only 154 problems. So that means you obviously have more than 1 minute per problem on average. Because of that relaxed pace, though, you know, the difficulty of an average question is going to be a little bit different. The ACT is arguably a straightforward, fairly black and white exam, kind of what you see is what you get. Whereas the SAT is a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more, a little bit grayer kind of thing, where you do have to work a little bit harder to come up with the answers. It does require you to think on your feet a little bit more, I guess, than the ACT. And the SAT, according to student reports, sometimes doesn't really feel like a test that you would take at school, whereas the ACT, you know, one can find that pretty comparable to, you know, a math test or a reading test that you might take in school. Another key difference between the two tests is that the ACT includes a science test. And it's certainly an anomaly between the two tests. There's a couple things that I'd like to point out about that science test, because I think there's some misperceptions of what that science test entails. It is not a test of a student's knowledge of science. Now, exposure to biology, chemistry, and physics is helpful, but it is not a test of your knowledge of those subjects in particular. 90% of what the ACT is going to throw at students in the science test is not taught in a typical American high school. So it's much more of a test of your ability to make sense of graphical information, charts, tables, and graphs that deal with various types of science like biochem and physics, but also astronomy and geology and marine biology. And you have to deal with that graphical information, answer 5 to 7 questions about those charts, tables, and graphs in a relatively brief period of time. So between the two tests, it's safe to say that the SAT is a little bit more difficult, at least on a per problem basis, than the ACT, but the ACT is a more time-constrained test. So when students are first starting out, we'd like to say, you know, kind of pick your poison here. What is it that you want to overcome? More difficult or more time-constrained? And we believe that the best way to begin to understand what might be more appropriate for you is to take a practice exam for each and begin to understand how you respond to each and how you score, relatively speaking, on each of those two tests. So the next question, when should I test? So we recommend, and I've conferred with numerous college counselors over the years, including Jody, we recommend testing, you know, 3 times over the course of junior and senior year. Ideally, you would take your first test during the first semester of junior year. That is contingent, of course, on whether or not you have had Algebra 2 and trigonometry in some places, because there are some important math test concepts that will be found in that coursework. So if you are just entering Algebra 2 Trig, when you get into your first semester of junior year, you may want to wait and take your first ACT or SAT in the second semester after you've started to cut your teeth on some of those important concepts. But for the most part, you know, if you're tracking along on a typical, you know, freshman year, sophomore year, and junior year program in math, you have been exposed to many of the concepts that the ACT or the SAT will throw at you. I think the big question is going to be your familiarity with the way in which those concepts are tested. And that's where some preparation and some practice tests will come in to help make you more comfortable and more familiar with the way those tests or those concepts are tested. So a typical track is to do some prep over the summer before junior year and to take a first ACT or SAT in the fall. And then to come back sometime in second semester after you've had, you know, much of the year's worth of reading and writing and math, and go back and take a second ACT or SAT sometime in the springtime, for example, of your junior year. And then as necessary, do some additional prep to prepare for either the September ACT or the late August or early October SAT of your senior year. It's important that you consider the November 1st deadline, which is applicable if you're thinking about applying to schools early action or early decision. Here in Minnesota, there's priority deadlines for both the University of Minnesota, the University of Wisconsin, and I'm sure that exists in other parts of the country as well. Every student is unique, so your testing plan really should be customized to meet the demands of your schedule. Hockey's a big thing up here, so you probably don't want to be doing a lot of prep in the middle of a very busy hockey season. Same thing with speech and debate, Model UN. So all that can be customized, and there's plenty of testing options to afford you plenty of opportunities to take the test when your schedule permits. Another common question that we get, should we take the writing test on the ACT or the essay test on the SAT? The answer is yes. We recommend that you take the writing test each time you take the SAT or the ACT or the SAT, unless you know that the schools you're applying to do not require or recommend the writing test. And that's fair to say for a good number of schools. Probably 75% of schools no longer require or recommend the writing test, but we do recommend that you make absolutely certain that the schools to which you're going to apply do not recommend it. If they do, then you need to take it at least once. And if you're taking the ACT, you probably need to take it each time that you test. The other caveat here is if you know that you're applying to schools that will superscore the ACT or the SAT, then taking it once would be adequate if those schools also require the writing portion. Given that we've got a lot of folks out on the East Coast, some folks in the middle of the country, and potentially some folks out on the West Coast, do colleges prefer one test over the other? An emphatic no, they don't. The way I put it, most schools could care less which test scores you supply to them, so long as you do if they require them. But I think the geographic biases toward one test or another still prevail all these years later. But the ACT has made some big inroads on both the East Coast and the West Coast, and there's plenty of people in the middle of the country that take the SAT. So like I said earlier, the best way to determine which test you should do is to do kind of baseline practice exams for each, determine if you've got a scoring advantage on one or the other, and gear your efforts toward that. All schools that require testing will gladly accept either an ACT or an SAT. None of them require both, but all of them are looking for you to put forth your best scores on one or the other tests. Do schools care how many times I take the test? No, they don't, with but a handful of exceptions. It's probably just 10 or 12 exceptions. Georgetown and Yale and Stanford may ask you for every test you've taken since you were in diapers. But outside of that, there isn't a school in the country that cares how many times you test. But you should care how many times you test, because we believe that 3 times is good measure and will afford most students the opportunity to achieve their best test scores. If you're doing some prep and some practice in advance of each, then it's unlikely that taking a test a 4th or a 5th time is going to move your score forward appreciably. So testing and test prep should not become an extracurricular exercise. You should plan to do 3 tests over the course of junior and senior year. And if you hit your mark on the 1st or 2nd go, congratulations, you get to put down this awful exercise and move back to the joys that junior and senior year will afford you. But thinking about testing, 2 or 3 times over the course of junior and early senior year would be good, is a good thought process. What do I need to know about taking the test with extra time? So you may qualify for extra time on the ACT or the SAT if you meet the following 2 conditions. First, you have a formal diagnosis of a learning disability such as dyslexia or dyscalculia, or you have an attention disorder such as ADHD. The other important point here is that you need to have been on an accommodations plan at your school for at least 12 months for the ACT or at least 4 months for the SAT. If you meet these 2 conditions, you should absolutely speak with your school's learning specialist about taking the test with extra time. I would say that extra time matters a little bit less on the SAT because it's less of a time constrained test. Over on the ACT, where approvals for extra time are a lot more stringent and difficult to come by, it matters more, and it can matter a great deal. Because if you get some opportunity to relax those time constraints, it can change the way in which you respond to that test. So if you have a diagnosis of a learning disability or an attention disorder, and if you've been on a plan for at least 4 months for the SAT or for a year for the ACT, it is certainly worth sitting down and talking to your school's learning specialist about the opportunity to take the test with extra time. So which test could be right for you? As I mentioned, using results from a practice SAT and ACT to begin with in order to assess your strengths and weaknesses with each test is a good place to begin. You can easily use Google to locate a concordance table, and I have an example on the next page to help you compare your scores between the ACT and the SAT. And if I haven't said it yet, I will say it clearly. You should never take an ACT or an SAT cold. There are plenty of opportunities to do a full-length practice exam, whether at home. Right now, because of COVID-19, there's some online testing opportunities available where you dial into a Zoom room and you can have the test proctored for you, so you get a sense of the pacing, you get a sense of taking the test, in more of a communal environment, even though it's virtual. Taking a full-length practice test subject to the formal time constraints is the best way to get a sense of how you're going to perform on those tests and what the actual test day might look like. But do not take one of these tests cold. There's no reason to. You can get every indication of how you do on a practice ACT or SAT, by taking a practice test and then using that information to help guide your next steps in terms of preparation and targeting the tests. So this is an example of a concordance table. There's the percentiles running kind of right down the middle with the ACT and SAT scores and PSAT scores on either side. If you're a current sophomore, what I would say is, looking at scores in the 30s right now is more of kind of a longing type thing. Most students do not start at scores at that level. Most students are going to start, somewhere in the 19, 20, 21 range. Some students will certainly score below that. Other students will certainly score above that. But a typical starting point is somewhere right around the median score of 20 on the ACT, about a 1050 or 1000 over on the SAT. The good news is that with preparation and practice, most students will improve. So your starting score is not your final score. And again, use those baseline practice exams to give you some good information about where you should focus your efforts. And again, there's no need to go out and take a formal ACT or SAT to get this information. A good practice exam, subject to the time constraints, will give you that information. So in terms of thinking about how to prepare for the tests, there's kind of myriad ways in which one can do some preparation. Again, it's an individualized process. What works for one student may certainly not work for another, and vice versa. For independent, self-motivated students, doing it yourself is perfectly acceptable. Jumping on Amazon or Barnes & Noble to grab a couple of prep books, to work your way through some practice exams, to get some practice with the ways in which these concepts are thrown at you. Could be all that a motivated student needs to get himself or herself in good position to take the test. There's a variety of classes. There's certainly private instruction and a variety of online programs. Again, because of COVID-19, most things have moved online. But you can tailor the type of prep that you undertake based on your budget, based on your availability. We always recommend starting with a practice test. And over the course of prep, we recommend taking, occasional practice tests to measure the progress that you make. So if we engage with the student for 2.5 months, we'd like for that student to do 3 practice tests during that time, once a month while they're preparing. I think you should expect to do homework in between your lessons. We typically ask students to complete about 2 hours worth of homework, and never take a real test cold. You wouldn't take a calculus test cold. Why would you do that with a high stakes admissions test? In terms of when to prep, I think you need to consider your schedule, your level of readiness, and your level of commitment. I think that's going to be different from student to student. Some students are chomping at the bit to get going with this. Other students are not quite ready and are not showing a lot of initiative or enthusiasm about it. We get it. I haven't met many students that like to prep for the tests, but we do think that a commitment to doing the work that's required is an important ingredient to a student's ultimate success. So if your student's not ready, it might be worth having a conversation and working out some kind of an agreement as to when that student might be ready. We do think that prepping during the summer is strategic because students don't have to face the demands of the school year at the same time. And they can take advantage of the flexibility that's afforded during the summer to do more of an immersion in the tests and to make some really nice progress. Starting a little bit earlier, so summer before junior year gives you an opportunity to shore up areas of weakness. And we think that fall of senior year is an excellent time to take that final test. You're a year older and a year wiser than many students first taking the test as juniors. We think that prep should be strategic. There's important information and important guidelines about how you pace yourself, important test taking techniques and so forth that you can learn through good instruction and practice. There's a good number of concepts that need to be reviewed. Some things that you haven't seen in a while or maybe never seen, like English grammar, at least the way the ACT and the SAT tend to test grammar. Same thing with some math skills that you may not have seen in a while. We also think there's a practical aspect to it, meaning those practice tests. You want to subject yourselves to the time constraints and the pressure that you're going to feel in a real test situation. So practice exams, I think, are a critical ingredient to a student's success. Another piece here is that don't just take practice tests to see how you do. We think that taking a practice test is half the battle. We think another important part of that is to do the work to understand where you went wrong when you took those practice tests. So understanding one's mistakes and learning how to avoid those mistakes on a subsequent test is important. The more you know about your mistakes, the less likely you're going to make that same mistake again. And because these are standardized tests, it is likely you're going to see a similar concept on your very next test. We think that taking the test multiple times is to your advantage. We'd like to say, don't just take the test, take on the test. Students who are in a good position to take the test are well prepped and feeling confident when they head in on test day. In terms of finding a test prep provider, talking to your friendly school counselor like Jody is a terrific place to start. They have wonderful ideas. Asking around, you're looking for organizations that have good reputations, that offer frequent practice exams, obviously a blending of conceptual and strategic information. And at this time, obviously, location is less of an issue as a lot of instruction is online. Jody, any comments that you wanted to add there?
I'll just echo, your school counselor can be a really great resource for you. So definitely be working with them. They know a lot of things and they're glad to help you. All right, so I've been in the Q&A while Ron's been chatting with you guys, and I do see a couple themes. I'm just gonna go to those themes first, and then I'll hit the questions that are on the screen. One theme has been, should I take both the SAT and the ACT? How do I choose? Do I have to take both? No, you don't have to take both. If colleges will require a score from one of them, but they don't need you to have a score from both of them. Now that said, if you're better at the SAT, then that's the one you should submit. If you're better at the ACT, then that's the one you should submit. And how are you gonna know if you don't try both? So we would recommend, yes, give them each a shot, but then once you determine if one is stronger than the other for you, then go with that one. Do you need to send the scores for both of them? No, and let me hit that first question that's up here on the screen. Which scores should I send to the colleges to which I will apply your strongest scores? If you're stronger on the SAT or stronger on the ACT, then that's the one you should send. It's as simple as that. When should you send them? Most people wait until the fall of their senior year to submit scores, and you often do need to submit an official score report from College Board or from ACT, although lately in college admissions, some schools have been allowing students to self-report their scores at the time of application and not submit an official score report unless they actually enroll, which is a cost-saving measure for students because it does cost money to send your scores. That's why both College Board and ACT offer free score sends at the time of registration, which is fine, but that means you're releasing the scores before you see them, which makes people uncomfortable sometimes, which is why a lot of people tend to wait. I also saw a lot of questions about, so if I'm applying to a test optional school, how do I know, should I send my scores or should I not send my scores? And that kind of actually goes along with the second question we have here. How do I come up with a target score? So you need to be looking at the colleges. They'll often release what they call their mid 50% of test scores of admitted students. So that means they take all the students they admitted, they drop the bottom 25% test scores, they drop the top 25%, and they give you that middle 50%. You should know what that range is. I tend to look that up on College Board's website. They report it for both SAT and ACT, but there's a lot of places you can find that information. So once you know that middle 50%, first of all, aim to get in there, in that range. But honestly, we'd rather see you in the top half of the middle 50%. That's when you can feel a little more confident. So if you're applying to a test optional school and you are solidly in that middle 50%, especially in the upper middle 50%, then yeah, go ahead and send your scores. If you are below the middle 50%, you're not even in the range, that's definitely when you consider not sending your scores. And if you're in the lower part of the mid 50%, that's probably when you should talk with your counselor, because it's going to put a lot of emphasis on other things when you apply test optional. Those other things include your grades, the difficulty of your classes, your activities, your letters of recommendation, and your essays. Let's see, let me hush for a second. And Ron, you want to hit that third question that's on our screen there?
Yeah, thanks, Jody. We do get this question a lot. What kind of improvement can my student expect? It is really subject to the amount of time that a student has to do the prep and their level of motivation. If mom or dad is following them into their lessons with their arm twisted behind their back, the outcome is probably going to be very different than a student who's, again, kind of chomping at the bit and eager to do this work. I think obviously the shorter the period of time, the less likely that, more significant improvements are going to happen, maybe a point or two in just a month, with a couple of months. And I use the ACT scale. I'm in Minnesota. We tend to do a lot of ACT prep here. With a couple of months, obviously you can produce some more interesting results. But I've seen students work terrifically hard and come away with just 2 points, and other students make it look really easy and come away with 6 or 7 points. So part of the thing that we do to provide reasonable guidance here is take those practice tests as you do your prep to kind of measure and mark the progress that you're making. I think those practice tests then give you an opportunity to do a reset if you need to, and to make some adjustments. Maybe I need to increase the intensity of my instruction. Maybe instead of once a week, I'll do twice a week, and so forth. But we do think that with a good plan, starting in the summer before junior year, and extending into that fall of senior year, gives you the best opportunity to realize the score that you'd like. I think if you're starting late, that's going to put you a little bit behind the 8 ball and kind of ramp up the pressure. If you start early, you're going to have multiple opportunities to prep and to test and to put yourself in the best position possible.
All right, let me chime in on a different note here and talk a little bit about the PSAT, because I've seen several people asking questions about that. First of all, College Board has not announced any changes to the PSAT at this time. That is, it's just too early to say. First, we need to know for sure that schools will be opening because PSAT is given typically during the school day. So it's just too early to say. But another question that I've seen people asking is, if we can't get an SAT or an ACT, do you think colleges will look at either PSAT scores or pre-ACT scores? I'll give that a maybe. Sure, I have not seen a single college say that they would be looking at those scores, but if they truly can't get anything else and you're pleased with PSAT or pre-ACT scores, I think they'd give it a look. Will they look at it the same as they would an SAT or an ACT? Probably not, because they're not as familiar with those tests as they are with the SAT, ACT. They've got all kinds of data that they've analyzed over how SAT and ACT scores predict success on their campuses, and that data can't translate easily to PSAT or pre-ACT. So will they make a formal push of, yeah, sure, send us your PSAT scores? Probably not. But if we actually do get to the situation where students truly cannot produce a test score, and that is the only thing, then they might look at that. And keep in mind, colleges right now are not anticipating that we will reach that point of a student has no test scores. They still anticipate that College Board and ACT will be able to provide testing so that students can submit a score. But if you end up with no score and you want to apply to a college that is not test optional, reach out to that college. Talk to them about that. They would not want you to not submit an application if you find yourself in that position of not being able to get a test completed. So reach out to the college in that situation. Let me hit that next question that's on the screen. What scores do I need to be competitive for merit scholarships? That depends on the college, honestly. You'll find some colleges will have a chart on their website that says, if you have this GPA and this test score, we're going to give you this much money. So then obviously just look at the chart, and that tells you what scores you need to get however much money. But that's not every college. Some colleges are really vague about it on their website. We'll give scholarships to students with high scores. Thanks. That didn't really tell me much, right? But in that case, you're welcome to reach out to the college and ask them, so can you tell me a little bit about what the scores were for last year's group, et cetera. Generally speaking, I would say you want to be, for merit scholarships from a college, larger merit scholarships, usually in the 30s on an ACT, and at least 1,400 or higher on the SAT, approximately. That's typically when you start getting into scholarship range. All right, Scott, you've been looking at the Q&A also. Do you see something that I have missed, any themes that I've missed that we can answer?
Well, Jody and Ron, thank you for a lot of great information. We have about 10 more minutes to answer some of those questions. And likewise, I have been, we have over 400 questions that have come in. And so one of the ones that I saw a number of times was, could you explain SuperScore and how that works?
You want to take that, Ron?
Sure. So super scoring is a practice that allows a student to combine his or her best section scores from across multiple sittings for a given test. So, you know, the SAT has two scores, the reading, writing component and the math component. If a student outperforms on the reading and writing on one test, and then on a second test does relatively better on the math test, schools that super score will allow the student to combine those two scores into a super score. You know, at a very high level, the SAT is a super scoring friendly test, meaning there's probably 1,400 or 1,500 colleges and universities that permit the super scoring of the SAT. The ACT, on the other hand, is just less friendly to super scoring. There's fewer, or maybe right about 200 schools that super score the ACT. You know, I think you may have heard, and I don't want to go too far into these waters, the ACT has made some overtures about what they're calling section retesting, which is supposed to kick off you know, this fall, that would allow a student to take just an individual section of the ACT after he or she has completed an entire pen and paper test starting in September of 2020. There's a host of questions about that. You know, logistically, how's that going to happen? It's supposed to be done online. Kind of an experience perspective, how can the ACT ensure that each student is going to have access to adequate bandwidth, similar screen sizes, and so forth. But then there's a much more practical and strategic question in that there isn't a single school or college or university that thus far has said that they will take a single test score, a single section score from the ACT, and consider that as part of the application process. The problem there is that admissions office software is simply not set up to take an individual section score from the ACT. So thus far, our guidance to parents has been every time you take an ACT, plan to sit for the whole test, because there's a lot of uncertainty about whether the whether colleges and universities will accept an individual section score. So beware the section testing until you can confirm with target colleges that they'll take it. But the SAT would be much more friendly in that respect. And so planning to submit 2 scores from the SAT would probably be welcome at most schools that you'll apply to.
Great, thank you. One of the other questions that I saw a number of times was students with learning disabilities or IEPs and needing extra time in the testing. Number one, is that available? And then number 2 is, does the college, I saw a question, is the college aware if a student gets extra time in testing?
No, the college does not know. They are not, College Board and ACT are not legally allowed to indicate that a student received an accommodation. So the college will be unaware of that. And yes, you can get accommodations. I did see a question and I answered it, but I'll answer it live too. If you receive accommodations at school, on school tests and what have you, and you would like to receive accommodations on either the ACT or the SAT, there is a separate process besides what you've done at your school. There's a separate process with College Board or with ACT where you need to apply through them as well. So work with your school counselor on submitting that application. With College Board, that process, you do it once at any point in high school, and it's with you for every College Board test you take throughout high school. So you can do that at any time. But with ACT, it's different. If you want to receive accommodations on an ACT, you apply for those accommodations at the same time as you apply for the test. So you need to be working with your counselor, make sure that you know the deadlines for that because it's a little bit earlier, but you can't do that until you're actually ready to take an ACT.
And I guess I'll further comment. The SAT effectively got out of the business of determining whether a student qualifies for accommodations and deferred that back to the high schools. I think it was December of 2018. So, we see approvals for extended time on the SAT far more frequently than we do for the ACT. So if your student's on a plan at school and has been on that plan for at least 4 months and has a diagnosis of a learning disability or attention disorder, it's a fairly safe bet that you will be granted extra time, not just again on the SAT, but on the PSAT and AP exams. It is a far more rigorous process with the ACT. I mean, the ACT has a panel of PhDs who evaluate these individual requests for extra time. They have a 2 to 3 week window within which they will get back to you, but you do need the school learning specialist involved, and they're going to provide a range of documentation to the ACT special testing website that has to be uploaded. So it's a more onerous process. And it's just more, they hand out extra time much more stringently than the SAT does. So just beware going into that. If you're going to pursue extra time on the ACT, begin that process early, engage your learning specialists as soon as you can to begin to understand some of the hoops you may need to jump through.
Excellent, thank you. And I know you answered it, but it came in numerous times as just people were asking again, if you wouldn't mind reminding them, how many times should they take the test? And I know you said it was a personal decision for a lot of these, but numerous times it was asked. Just what your thoughts are around that again.
Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, I suggested that students should plan to test 3 times, ideally with a typical student, doing some prep summer before junior year. It's not too early to begin to get familiar with the test and to get some good practice in, and then taking a test in fall of junior year, in spring of junior year, and then as necessary in fall of senior year. that seems to be a good cadence in terms of testing for each of the students. It allows them to take advantage of the summers before junior and senior year to do some of this heavy lifting. So 2 or 3 times, and I think if you can get a score on your first or second go, congratulations, you get to get away from this unsavory process a little bit sooner than your colleagues. But I would expect, but I think students should expect to take the test 3 times, over the course of junior and senior year. Going beyond that is unlikely going to result in an appreciably higher score, and taking the test just once and hoping for the best is probably not strategic either. Spreading this out over some time, being able to bring to bear some of the learning that you'll do during your junior year to help boost particularly math scores by springtime of junior year is strategic and wise.
I saw a bunch of people asking about subject tests, so I'm just going to chime in on that too. Most colleges do not require the SAT subject test. If you're not familiar with what that is, I'm not talking about the SAT, although this is administered by the SAT. It's an SAT subject test. It's a 1-hour test. They offer it across several different subjects. You can take up to 3 in one test date. Most colleges do not require them, so the majority of students are not taking subject tests. The colleges that do require them, I've seen some of those schools go from, it's not required this year, it's just recommended. So be checking with your colleges to see if they require them, and if so, have they changed that to recommended. So subject tests are kind of a little bit lower priority right now. I think colleges are realizing that it's a little bit higher priority to just get an SAT or an ACT. Also, I saw some questions about, should I take the writing section on either the SAT or the ACT? That is optional. Again, it depends on what the college wants. Almost always our answer is going to be, it depends on the college. And same for the writing section. I would say the majority of colleges do not require the writing section. So in that case, you don't need one. However, if you apply to just one college that does require it, now you need one. So our typical advice is at least once take the test with the writing section so that you have that score should you need it. But then if you know you're not applying to any colleges that are going to require that writing section, you can stop.
And I'll follow on those comments, Jody, with a question that I often get on the heels of that, which is, can I take the writing test alone? And sadly, you cannot. So that's why you might as well take the 40 minutes of pain at the end of the 3 hours of multiple choice testing at least once and get it out of the way.
Yep. Yeah, agreed.
Excellent.
All right, I don't know how we are on time.
Yeah, we're coming up to the mark now, and so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to conclude this expert presentation on maximizing your ACT or SAT score in the era of COVID-19. I want to thank our panelists here, Jody and Ronald, for taking the time to present this. It was a lot of information, so. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is recorded, so it will be available once it is processed at the end here, so you can run through it again. But remember that you can come back at any time to watch this recording. We're going to keep this up during the entire crisis. So with that, I do want to encourage you to explore your college options in our virtual college fair. We have hundreds of interactive virtual booths where you can watch videos, download materials, and even chat live with admission representatives from that institution. You'll also find some booths have a schedule of their own live stream video presentations. So make sure you visit that today or come back while the event is still live to enjoy those experiences. Thank you once again. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.